yeah, I've kept my passion up for flying parachutes. And when I stopped skydiving, I got involved with paragliding. And in fact, I went overseas in 84 and 85 with the South African team. And there were Frenchmen in 85 were running off the mountains in the Alps with skydiving parachutes.
So welcome to the first interview for 2023. As you know, last year we spoke to people that I consider inspirational. They're people from all walks of life, very different walks of life. And today I've got a gentleman with me who has shared a very similar journey when it comes to my radio career, but then branched out into other things. He's the man with the perfect voice for sport. He asks all the right questions whenever he does a sports interview. And he's got one hell of a story to tell because he's done some really cool things. Jeff Ayliffe in George, good morning.
Gordon, good morning. Nice to chat.
It's so great to have you here, man. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the channel and for doing the interview.
Yeah, no worries. Always a privilege, always an honor.
So, Jeff, I normally like to start these chats on let's rewind to where you come from. What was hometown? Where were you born? And school and the like. Where are you from?
Gordon, I'm originally from Maritzburg, Peter Maritzburg, Sleepy Hollow.
Yes.
And yeah, that was my background. My junior school was Merchiston. And funny enough, my school years, I remember with mixed emotions. I loved junior school. I was a Murky Mudrat. High school, I really, my passions and my interests diversified. And school might be pleasant memories for a lot of people. It wasn't pleasant for me. It was basically, for me, it was a case of getting matric done as soon as possible and getting the hell out of there. So yeah, but I loved my junior school years. I was at Merchiston, and I matriculated at St. Charles College in Peter Maritzburg.
Oh, wow. So you're a Maritzburg boy. So there's a lot of the heart of KZN beating in your chest, even though you're synonymous with the Western Cape now because you've been there for a long time. You were telling me a story yesterday. Are we allowed to tell the story about skydiving into the school, or is that still embargoed?
No, we can still tell it. I was very passionate. I discovered skydiving at a very early age. I guess I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. I was at the Royal Show in Peter Maritzburg, and I saw my first time I'd seen the skydivers used to do a show jump into the Royal Show, demo jumps.
Yeah.
And I saw these guys in free fall with these plumes of smoke.
Yes.
That you literally see the speed they were in free fall at. And I said to my parents there and then, I said, that's it. I demanded books and whatever I could. And they gave me a book called Sport Parachuting for that birthday, which was, I think, my 7th birthday. And I was pretty much determined. And I started going to the parachute club at the age of about 11 or 12 years old.
Wow.
My parents used to take me to the local parachute club in Maritzburg.
Wow.
About 13 or 14, I was a qualified packer. I got a packer's license. And I started jumping just before my 16th birthday. It was you had to start jumping. You had to wait until you were 16. I got permission from Air Club just before my 16th birthday, a week before. And I started skydiving at school. Yeah, my last day of matric. So I never really was. I enjoyed athletics. I did do athletics at school, but I wasn't into the rugby, the cricket, the mainstream stuff. And I hated going to rugby matches on weekends because that was my skydiving time.
Yeah. And
my last day of school, I did a skydive into school, unbeknown to the school except my best friend. We have almost like a ceremony on the main rugby field just before your final exam. And the whole of matric was there with all the other schools in the grandstands, and the headmaster, he was like, where's Ayliffe? Where's Ayliffe? And I was in an airplane. My mom took me in my school uniform. My mother dropped me off at the airport. A pilot who I'm not going to name took me up in a 182 Cessna. We couldn't get enough altitude because of the cloud.
Oh dear.
And I was a bit of a bandit in those days anyway. So I said to him, listen, just get me whatever you can and fly over the school. We were low. We were about probably 1,200 feet.
Wow.
And I said, just fly over the school, keep the power going. So I've got a little bit of speed on exit. I exited at about 1,200 feet, took about a 3-second free fall, opened. My friend knew exactly who it was. Everyone was looking up. They heard this crack of the parachute opening. I landed on the field next to the school, threw my parachute off, joined the class. My poor headmaster, bless his soul, was so bewildered. He didn't know what was going on. But anyway, he carried on.
What a thing to do.
Yeah, and ironically, Gordo, during that exam, he came up to me and he said, "Please come and see me in the office afterwards." And I was terrified. I said, "Well, that's it."
And what did he say?
He said to me, just come to the office. There's something we need to chat about. And it turned out there was a media guy from the Natal Witness who had seen this and had come and asked if he could do an interview with me. And Mr. Bowden thought it was a great idea, coverage for the school. But I said to the Witness guy, I said, "Listen, please, if you interview me, I'll get grounded. I've been grounded before. I can cope with that, but the pilot will lose his license."
Yeah.
And thankfully, the media guy was a pilot and he understood the ramifications. So he said, fine. And it never went to the paper.
What a story, though. I mean, and what a dramatic way to sort of say goodbye to school, which I think is absolutely brilliant. So you developed this love for jumping out of airplanes. How many jumps do you think you've done in your lifetime?
What I've done just over 3,000.
Wow.
I ended up working full time in skydiving. I ended up doing it for a living for many years. And trust me, 3,000 skydives is not a lot. I mean, friends of mine who started with me who have continued jumping and they still jump, they've got an excess of 25,000 jumps. So.
No, I must be honest. As someone who wouldn't jump out of a perfectly good plane, you're about 3,000 jumps ahead of me. So maybe that's a challenge. Maybe I should try and take on a skydive. But I mean, when it comes to being in the air, you also like, is it called paragliding? What's the official term?
I've kept my passion up for flying parachutes. And when I stopped skydiving, I got involved with paragliding. And in fact, I went overseas in 84 and 85 with the South African team. And there were Frenchmen in 85 were running off the mountains in the Alps with skydiving parachutes.
Wow.
Paragliding didn't really exist back then. So we came back to South Africa and we started running off mountains, Otter's Bluff and various mountains, Hela, with our skydiving parachutes, and we were soaring in strong winds. We didn't know what we were doing, but we were staying up and soaring. And there was no skydiving in those days. Yeah. In 86, skydiving started. It became an official sport. So I'm proud of the fact that I was in paragliding pretty much at grassroots level, and I've still, to this day, I still fly. I've continued flying, and I still love my flying here.
Yeah, that kind of story is very similar to the guys who started out in triathlon, where they used to weld clip-on tri-bars onto their bikes. You know, that was the start of it all. You were doing paragliding with skydiving parachutes, and I mean, you've taken some incredible visuals as well. Do you have a little bit of a passion for photography and videography? Because it certainly comes across in a lot of the things that you do online.
I do. I absolutely love it. And funny enough, that too goes back to skydiving. There's a top American skydiver, a guy called Norman Kent. And Norman was so far ahead of the curve in terms of his photography. He was the first skydiver that took normal skydiving video, which was pretty barnstorming stuff, and he started turning it into an art form and started making films and putting creative effort into it. Wow. And I saw that, and it sort of inspired me to start taking photographs of the sport from a more creative angle. And yeah, I'm still, as you know, Gordo, I love my video and my photography. It's always been and they're always very well structured and beautiful shots that you seem to get. I can never seem to replicate anything. I mean, you and I remember standing at the ABSA Cape Epic one year. You took a photo. I took a photo next to you. Yours was brilliant. Mine looked like I'd stuck my finger on the lens. Okay, so that's where I met you. I met you in the endurance, sports endurance world. I was doing race announcing. You were doing social media and media coverage. But your careers in media started well before that. I'd like to focus on that for a bit, because you and I have chatted before, and there's similarities to how we got into this thing called media. Tell me about your radio story and how you got into it. So my radio story, funnily enough, goes back to skydiving. Wow. I told you that trip earlier when I went to Brazil with the South African team in 85. Yeah. I was in the office at the parachute club. The phone rang and I just happened to pick up the call. And it was a girl called Janet, and Janet was formerly Janet White and is now Janet Whittam. Janet worked for Capital Radio at the time as the co-presenter with Dave McLeod. And Janet said she'd heard that there was a South African team going to Brazil to compete in the World Championships, and could she get in touch with one of the jumpers on the team? And I said, well, funnily enough, I'm one of the jumpers. And I was basically a very young guy then. And she said to me, brilliant. Capital were, as you know, were fairly sort of progressive with the way they did things. She said, please, can you do a 30-second voice insert for us from Brazil every night and send it through? So I thought, yeah, great. It sounds like fun. And I, funny enough, was a fan of Capital. I listened to Capital at the time. I listened to Dave Gaselli's show, and I really enjoyed it. And I was pretty excited, and almost more excited about the fact that I was going to do Capital Radio stuff from Brazil rather than the skydiving. And I did it. When I got back, Dave McLeod phoned me, and they were like pretty impressed. And they said, "Man, it was great. As somebody who hasn't done radio before, would you like to come to our studios in Durban and have a look around?" And that kind of got me excited. And I saw the studio, and I thought, "Hey, man, this is an option for something that I'd be interested in doing." And I said, "Is there any way I could come and work with these guys?" And they said, "Look, we don't have any positions or budget, but feel free if you want to come along on weekends." David had a show called the Saturday Sports Special. And he said, "If you want to pop in and just help me, you can learn." So Gordon, I spent probably a year going in on weekends, just learning with Dave McLeod and learning the ropes between my skydiving stuff. And Janet resigned, and guess what? The job was open, and Dave said, "Jeff, it's yours." So I ended up working for Capital Radio.
And from there, so I mean, Capital was like, if you worked on Capital Radio at the time, you were the coolest person on the planet, in my view, because they were that rebel radio station that was just cooler than everybody else, because the SABC at the time just wasn't doing anything remotely near to what Capital was doing. But a great place to get your first major gig on radio, but you moved on to other stations as well.
I did. Capital Radio, I was with Capital till 94, and that was kind of near the end, was very clearly in sight. And I made a decision that the sort of place for radio at that point that looked like it had stuff happening was Cape Town.
Yeah.
And I love Cape Town. I'd been to Cape Town on a trip. I went to Marion Island, and I'd left from Cape Town, my first visit to Cape Town. So I saw Cape Town, what a beautiful place it was. And I ended up going to Cape Town. I applied for a job at Good Hope FM, and I got the job as a sports presenter.
Wow.
And my co-sports presenter was a very young Mr. Paul Kay.
Ah, well, now that's interesting, hey, and how your careers have progressed since then.
Yeah, so that was where Paul and I first met. Yeah.
What do you love most about so I was never on the sports side of radio. For me, it was always the presenting the music stuff and that kind of side. But you have what I consider one of the finest voices for sport. There's a thing about sports presenters. They have a certain way and mannerism in speaking, not just in the way that they pronounce things, but the way they paint pictures with their words. Were you always attracted to that? Is it just something that came naturally, or did you have to learn to present sport in a way that was contemporary?
Yeah, I think it came naturally in a way because of where my interests in sports lie. Funny enough, Gordo, I don't consider myself to be a good journalist per se, because I love to always focus on the positive. And I know journalists have got to be the bad guys sometimes, but my whole career, and funny enough, it's got me places. I've got into situations where there's been some dirty stories, and I've seen that, and I thought, you know what? And it's a story that I haven't blamed the sports person, and I thought, well, I don't want to go there, and I've left it. And but anyway, I'm going on a different track. So I've always been passionate about sports. And the other thing is, my sports hero in terms of presenters was a guy called Glenn Hicks.
Yes.
Back in the day. And Glenn Hicks was obviously very well known on 5FM. He did the Sports Hour with Louis Carpus. And Glenn Hicks was, in my opinion, still one of the most phenomenal sports presenters in terms of the way he told stories with his voice and the passion. And
Yes.
maybe I molded myself a little bit on Glenn Hicks. Certainly that was my my sort of flag as to how I wanted to present my sport one day. So yeah, I think it's a bit of both.
Any desire to get back into that? Because I mean, you're doing something very different now, and you have done for the last couple of years. But any desire to get back into the world of media, particularly radio and doing sport?
Man, just as well as anybody, Gordon, radio, once you've been in live radio, it never leaves you. So
yeah,
I always do miss it. Always do miss it. And hopefully I'm looking at being at the ABSA Cape Epic next year. I've been chatting to them with the aim being radio syndication, doing some radio stuff.
Oh, fantastic.
So,
fantastic.
If there are any radio stations out there that are listening and you want content from the ABSA Cape Epic, I can deliver the content for them. And but that's so you always miss radio, and I do miss it. I do miss it.
Yeah, do me a favor.
I've got a little an outdoor insert that I do on a Cape Town radio station on weekends, every weekend.
Brilliant.
So that kind of keeps me in touch.
Yes, and it's like you say, you never really want to let go completely. I mean, when I left the Eastern Cape to move to Durban, I had zero intention of staying in radio. Then it was full on sports announcing, Ironman, comrades, that kind of stuff. And then when I got here, it literally took half a phone call from East Coast Radio to say, "Hey, do you want to do a weekend show?" And I was like, "Yes, okay, fine." It's like the mafia, you can never leave.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
just can't
Exactly.
leave.
That old song from Hotel California, you can check
Yes.
out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Yeah.
That's the radio for you. Hey, listen, if there are radio stations that are listening, and I know a couple of people in the industry, so ABSA Cape Epic is like the Tour de France of mountain biking. It's the biggest and most prestigious mountain biking event in the world. And if anyone can give you great coverage from that, it's Jeff Ayliffe. And his phone number is, no, I'm just kidding. But if you want his phone number, get hold of me because I'll give it to you. That sounds brilliant. There was a couple of other things that you did at the ABSA Cape Epic that I really enjoyed. You did a lot of your video inserts in the morning, just before the starts. You would walk around, you chat to some of the pros, and that content for me became a habit to watch it every morning. That, I got up, I made my cup of coffee, I had my rusk, and I was watching Jeff at the starts, walking around chatting to everybody.
Yeah, that for me was one of the passions of one of the biggest highlights of my work at the ABSA Cape Epic. And the nice thing, as you know as well, Gordon, is that over the years I've worked on the epics, you build a personal relationship with a lot of the pros.
Yes.
I've seen people who they don't know who arrive there at their first epic, and I've seen them walking up to them with a phone to do a live video, and the guy will look at them, be it a Carl Platt or Annika Langveld or whoever, will look at them and kind of not sure and look away, and then they'll do the interviews. But I'm privileged to have been at the stage with the Epic where I used to walk up and Carl used to see me, or Annika used to see me, or whoever, out the corner of their eyes, and they knew exactly why I was there, why I was coming, and they used to look at the phone and address me and say, "Hi, Jeff, good morning, do you want to chat?" They knew exactly, there was no misunderstanding, and you know a little bit about their backstory, so you get a really good bit of banter, which the viewers obviously appreciate. And it's crazy, man, being on a live, working a live thing for the ABSA Cape Epic, because I was on their account for a couple of the years, and it's crazy. The moment you hit that live button, you just see the views going just through the roof, and you point the camera at Carl, and you just see German flags going. One of the Brazilians, and you just see Brazilian flags. It's a great experience. Yeah.
You actually touched on something there, like you built the relationship with these guys, and I've heard horror stories of one or two other journalists who've tried to get in and just been quite rude to the pros. And the pros don't like that. They like their space. They're there to do a job, and they understand that media is part of what they need to do, but it's not their ultimate focus. They've got PR people that do that. But I think one of the benefits that you have is you're a completely approachable, humble person. And so I think you tend to get more out of these interviews than somebody else would, because people are just comfortable around you.
Yeah, I've also, there's been situations in the past at the Epic where maybe a bit of controversy with shortcuts and stuff, where the riders have been genuinely. There's a classic example with Annika Langveld and Ariane Kleinans in those days. Now Ariane Luthi, they took a shortcut by mistake 1 year, and it was a genuine mistake, and they lost a lot of time. And there was some of the journalists were pretty aggressive about the way it was handled. I went to them and said, "Listen, I don't want to interview you. I can see you in a bad space. If you feel comfortable to talk, just please let me know." And I was then approached by the specialized boss at that stage. He said, "Listen, they really appreciate the approach, and Annika and Adrian will chat to you. You can come to the."
Oh, wow. You see, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And another classic example, which will always sit with me, is it was a World Cup, downhill World Cup in Stellenbosch. I wasn't hired. I wasn't working at that stage. I arrived there and I just wanted to do an interview with Annika. Annika won that World Cup, Annika Langveld. And I wanted to do an interview with her, but I wasn't part of the media crew. And I was standing, and security was pretty hectic because it was run by the World Cup. There was a lot of foreign journalists there with all their cameras waiting, trying to get her attention on stage. And she was leaving and she saw me. And she came up and she said, "Hi, Jeff, do you want to speak?" And I said, "Man, I'd love to, but I'm not accredited." And she said, "No, come through." And she opened the security gate. The security guard was going to stop me. And Annika said, "No, he's with me." And she took me through, and we did the interview going back, and the other media guys were furious, the foreigners. But that's the example,
Fantastic.
So yeah, it was.
Here's a tough question for you. What's your favorite sport?
That is tough.
That is a tough question to ask a sports journalist, right?
From personally doing, or from just generally watching?
Doing, reporting, just in general.
Look, obviously, I will always say paragliding, and
Yeah.
I've been climbing a lot of time, most of my life as well. I love climbing, I love paragliding, so those sports are always very special for me. And reporting on, it's got to be there, the outdoor sports. Trail running, very close to my heart.
Yes.
I love reporting on that.
Yes.
Obviously, the ABSA Cape Epic, and I've just at this point, if I can throw something in. I hope the person involved doesn't mind, but when I resigned from radio, from Prime Media, in 2011 to go on my own and start my own media business, I was told by a few people that I was committing career suicide, and I had no experience or work in big events. So a long process to get big clients to back you if you want to start working. Like you guys are now household names, and bless her soul, Sarah Harrop didn't know me from a bar of soap. And she had a meeting. I said, can I have a meeting? She sat down with me. I said, this is who I am. This is what I do. I'd love to get involved with the Epic because I like mountain biking. It was a big event. Sarah didn't, and a lot of the events said to me, listen, get some experience, come back, we'll see. Sarah pulled me on first year without knowing me, pulled me on, gave me a gig doing radio stuff. And that really launched me, Gordon. So I have got a very fond in my heart for Sarah. So,
absolutely. Myself, one of the things I love about Sarah and the Epic crew, and Kevin, all the guys there, is they generally find a team that's good and they stick with them. I mean, I've worked with the same guys at the ABSA Cape Epic for years, because they like the consistency of a reliable professional team. And you've been part of that since, well, before I was there, and I've worked everyone. You've been there with me. Okay. So, let's move away from that just for a second, and focus on something that you did that I really think you need to revisit, share a bit more about. You decided you like to do handstands. Tell me more.
Man, my father dragged me kicking and screaming, literally fighting, to the gymnastics club in Pietermaritzburg as a 6-year-old boy. And my father decided he loved gymnastics. He was a coach. And he used to coach the elites, and I didn't want to know it. And he dragged me to the skydiving club when I was 6 years old, and I started doing gymnastics, and that turned out to be the best thing, Gordon, that ever happened to me in my life. I ended up doing gymnastics for about 10 years.
Wow.
And I loved it, and it molded me in terms of balance, in terms of sport and coordination, hand-eye coordination. It was the best thing that could have happened to me. And I started doing handstands at the age of 6, and I gymmed. I got into the Natal team, and I was very passionate. And the reason I stopped gymnastics was because I found skydiving. So there came
skydiving is the central theme here. If you want to learn to skydive, get a hold of Jeff. So
the handstand thing, and on New Year's Day, I've always done handstands, but not every day, but just occasionally. I've just loved doing handstands. And New Year's Day, I was down at the river in Wilderness, and I was doing handstands, and my son was with me, Taylor, and he said, hey, let me take a picture. Got my cell phone, took a picture, and he said to me, hey, Dad, you know what? It's 1st of January. And I said, and he said, why don't you just do a handstand every day, and we'll take a picture, and it'll be really cool. And I said, and I was driving home, and I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? It sounds like a good idea. And I said, in fact, I'll call it Handstand 365.
I love it.
And like an idiot, that night, I posted the picture, and like a moron, I put, I'm going to do a handstand every day of the year, which you don't do. And it wasn't into it. I was like, what have you done? What have you done?
Well, it wasn't just the fact that you were doing handstands. It was the fact that you had to find great locations to do these handstands. I mean, a handstand every day is impressive on its own, but then you had to the picture had to be better than the day before, right? There's a bit of a challenge there.
Well, the irony is that became the driving force, is that I started with a benchmark with these really cool places. And then I kind of felt, and the reaction I got from friends was really humbling. I was like, man, this is incredible. And then the inner struggle became, right, well, I've got to keep this going, and I've got to find these. I can't just go and do a handstand on the front garden. I've now got to find these places. And that evolved slowly. And eventually it was the one that really launched me was I got permission to do a handstand on top of the Cape Town Stadium, on the roof of the Cape Town Stadium, on the glass roof.
Brilliant.
And that was an absolute no when I went there. They said, it's not going to happen. You can't do it. Forget about it. And I left. And Ryan O'Connor had a contact with somebody. And Ryan pulled some strings. And next thing I had a phone call, and Ryan said, Jeff, you in? Go, and this is the oak to go and call. Chief of security. I was in. And I did that handstand, and that handstand blew up, and it went to Cape Town, etc. And the paper got hold of it, and that started the media push. But amazingly, it then became such an invigorating project because I then was challenged every day creatively to find a place. Physically,
Yes.
I was getting stronger and stronger and stronger,
Yeah.
and it just took a life of its own.
Well,
and Gordon, I used to walk into, I was at a garage with my son one day, and
yeah.
this woman was staring at me, a Celtics, in the garden route, and she was staring at me, and Kaylin said, Dad, this lady's looking at you, like, what's, and eventually she came up to me and said, sorry to be rude, but aren't you the handstand guy? I realized that this thing.
I mean, that was phenomenal. You know, I was on your case last year about doing a book, you know, putting a book together of the 365 handstands with a little story behind each one. I really think that'd be good. And also, I would certainly love you to republish some of the bigger photos. I mean, I remember the one on top of, wasn't there one on a cable car? That was insane. Like, who does a handstand on top of a cable car? Like, do me a favor.
Yeah, that was the big goal. The big aim was always the cable car, and that was pretty much like the Cape Town Stadium one. I had a meeting with the cable car guys, and they just said straight out, "It's not going to happen. Forget it. It's not going to happen." And I then went back and sat down with them again, and I showed them pictures, and I showed them press cuttings from Cape Town Stadium. I showed them the backlog of what I'd done, and he looked at this and he said, "Yeah, you know what?" The manager at the time, and he said, "You know what? This is possibly, we can do this." Spoke to a security team. Next thing, I was given the go ahead. We had to go and do a few rehearsals. I had to show them where I was going to do it and how we were going to do it. They had to be very happy with it.
Yeah.
And it came together nicely. So
I mean, that's iconic. That is iconic. And you see, it's that I was saying earlier, when you interview people, you tend to get them to open up. It's the same thing that happened with the Cape Town Stadium and with the cable car. You know, people like you, and they trust you, and that's awesome. I really think that you need to republish that stuff. I think that there needs to be some sort of book or something, because it really is. I mean, those images are amazing. And if I could ask a favor, would you send us a few of those iconic pictures, so when I'm editing this video, I can pop them in, so people can maybe have a look at what we're talking about. Any plans to repeat that type of thing? I
don't know.
Really?
Just if I can just throw something quickly on the book, Gordon. I actually had discussions with the Red Cross Children's Hospital, and they agreed. My plan was to do a book and then sell the book and give all the funds to Red Cross Children's Hospital. Yes. They actually agreed to that, and then unfortunately COVID arrived.
Right.
And that everything just kind of came to a grinding halt. But so the plans, I need to follow that through. And put together a book, even if it's a less grandiose version of what I originally had planned. But there were so many occasions. I did one in the Parliament, in the House of Parliament in Cape Town, with the Speaker sitting at her desk. It was just, there's so many that I would love to do it. But plans to do something again, I don't know. It was a great year for me, but I don't think to repeat the handstand thing. I think it's already been done.
Right. So you've got to find something new.
Finding something new. Yeah, and it's not going to be headstands. Few people have said headstands. It's not going to be headstands.
No.
I don't do headstands.
One hand handstand. Marine push-ups. I don't know. We'll think of something. We'll challenge you. You certainly are fit enough to do any of these challenges that we throw at you. Lastly, Jeff, you're in George at the moment. Where do you go from here? What would you like to still achieve? You know, I mean, an amazing life story to this point. There's a lot of living left to do. What's the plans for you?
Man, that's funny enough. I was discussing with Christy last night, you know, what's my future plans? And it's a difficult question for me. Through COVID, as you know, the sports stuff shut down, and I've got very involved with the conservation side with film.
Yes.
I started doing a lot of work at one of the local game reserves, Portlieskop, near here, and that progressed. And I've now been doing a lot of work up in the Northern Cape, near Northern Cape, as well as the Eastern Cape, in the area of Addo. Doing back-end film work for clients with things like rhino relocations and game capture and stuff. And that's been a big passion for me. And I've always had a passion for the anti-poaching side of things. But conservation is difficult. The sport suddenly started to open up again. I'm going to be working on the ocean race in Cape Town in February.
Yes.
Back at the Epic, hopefully in March. So I don't know. I was naughty in that I went straight out of school, straight into sports stuff. So this is what I've got to do. I've got to keep doing this media stuff.
And you're good at it.
Yeah, at the moment, if you'd asked me this question a year ago, the reason it's so hard for me to answer, if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have had no doubt I'm going into conservation full time. That's it. But if you're asking me now, already the sport's opening up, and I still have a passion for sport. I love working with the athletes. So it'll be between those two lines somewhere.
Yeah.
And hopefully some radio will still be involved, and hopefully some film and photography will still be involved.
Well, you're a multi-talented man. I certainly think your media company can branch both conservation and sports and radio, and I think you could do it all. And we really appreciate your time. And what a story, man. What an absolutely brilliant story. And if I'd ever do a first skydive, I hope that you'll be the one to push me out the airplane.
You won't need to be pushed.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Jeff Ayliffe, all the way from George in the Western Cape, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to your lovely lady as well for letting us hijack your morning. And what a story, man. And we're just so grateful.
My pleasure. And as I said, Gordo, it's always a privilege to speak to you.